Americans believe their country fights for freedom. Every president says so. Every textbook confirms it. The explanation feels noble and complete. It is the cover story. The United States did not stumble into permanent warfare. The country built permanent warfare, deliberately, systematically, profitably. The transformation took 80 years, and the architects left their fingerprints in congressional testimony, SEC filings, and presidential archives. Here's the history no school will teach you. The most decorated Marine in American history called war a racket. A 5-star general warned the nation on live television. A future president documented the fraud in 51 official reports. These men saw the machinery from inside. They named the companies. They cited the profits. They begged Americans to pay attention. Americans did not pay attention. The numbers prove the business model works. DuPont increased profits 950% during World War I. Bethlehem Steel increased profits 1,700%. Defense spending in 2024 reached $886 billion. The Pentagon failed its 6th consecutive audit in 2023. Auditors found $3.8 trillion in assets unaccounted for. This is not incompetence. This is engineering. Money flows through bottlenecks designed by contractors. Jobs spread across congressional districts on purpose. Former generals collect paychecks from companies they once funded. The structural incentives align toward one outcome: more spending, more contracts, more war. The gatekeepers became partners. The regulators became employees. The machinery of extraction embedded itself so deeply into American life it became invisible. Welcome to Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. Every April 15th, roughly 25 cents of every federal tax dollar you send to Washington goes to the Department of Defense. A family of 4 pays over $10,700 annually for military spending. Your retirement portfolio holds defense contractor stocks. Your neighbor works at a facility building missile components. The F-35 fighter jet has suppliers in 45 states. You live inside the machine. You fund it with every paycheck. And until now, nobody explained how it was built. The men who built it left a paper trail. Generals testified under oath. Presidents spoke on camera. Committees produced reports. The evidence sits in archives waiting. Exposed, ignored, still operating. This is the documented history of how America turned war into a $14 trillion business model. Smedley Butler stood before Congress in 1935 wearing 2 Medals of Honor. No other Marine in history had earned both. He had spent 33 years fighting in 5 wars across 3 continents. He had killed for his country. He had bled for his country. Now he intended to embarrass his country. War is a racket, Butler told the committee. It always has been. His definition was precise. A racket is something not what it seems to the majority of people. War seemed like patriotism. War seemed like defense. War was profit disguised as sacrifice. Butler came with receipts. DuPont. The gunpowder manufacturer earned $6 million annually before World War I. By armistice, annual profits reached $58 million. The company sold explosives. The explosives killed soldiers. The company collected checks. Bethlehem Steel earned more. Profits increased 1,700% during the war years. The company produced ships, armor plating, and artillery shells. Every round fired meant revenue collected. United States Steel, International Nickel, Utah Copper, Central Leather. Butler read the list of companies into the congressional record. He cited their peacetime earnings. He cited their wartime earnings. The gap between those numbers measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. 21,000 new millionaires emerged from World War I. Butler counted them. 21,000 men became wealthy, while 116,000 American soldiers died in French mud. The general described his own career with savage honesty. He had spent 3 decades as enforcement for American business interests. His rifle had opened markets. His Marines had collected debts. He helped make Mexico safe for American oil companies in 1914. He landed Marines in Haiti in 1915 and helped make it safe for National City Bank to collect revenues. He helped make Cuba a decent place for the boys from the banks to collect their profits. He pacified Nicaragua in the interest of the banking house of Brown Brothers from 1909 to 1912. He brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. He helped make Honduras right for American fruit companies in 1903. Butler summarized his career in words the committee would never forget. I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer for capitalism. The testimony landed like a bomb. Newspapers covered it. Citizens discussed it. And then the country moved forward, as if Butler had said nothing at all. Butler published a pamphlet expanding his testimony. The Library of Congress still holds copies. War is a Racket runs 14 pages. The document names companies, cites profit margins, and describes mechanisms. It reads like an instruction manual written by the man who carried out the instructions. Butler proposed solutions. tax all war profits at 100% above peacetime levels. The men profiting from war would lose their incentive to promote it. Make all workers in war industries accept the same wages as soldiers in trenches. The workers would lose their incentive to support it. Make war financiers and munitions makers serve on front lines. They would lose their enthusiasm for starting it. Let soldiers vote on whether to declare war. Only those who would fight should decide whether to fight. Congress adopted none of these proposals. The corporations Butler named continued operating. The profit margins he documented remained legal. The system he exposed continued expanding. Butler died in June 1940 at the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia. 6 months later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America entered the largest war in human history. The machine Butler described did not shrink. The machine grew. Harry Truman drove his own Dodge through the Missouri mud in early 1941. He had heard complaints from constituents about Camp Leonard Wood. Construction contractors were wasting government money. The junior senator decided to see for himself. What Truman found convinced him the problem extended beyond Missouri. Material sat unused in open fields. Workers stood idle on the clock. Contractors billed the government for work nobody completed. The pattern looked systematic. Truman returned to Washington and proposed a special committee to investigate the National Defense Program. Over 7 years, the Truman Committee held hundreds of hearings, interviewed thousands of witnesses, and produced 51 reports. The committee saved American taxpayers an estimated $15 billion. Adjusted for inflation, the savings exceed $250 billion in current dollars. The National Archives holds these records in Record Group 46. They remain available. The findings remain relevant. The committee discovered faulty airplane engines knowingly sold to the military. Wright Aeronautical Corporation shipped engines with cracked cylinder heads. Company inspectors identified the defects. Management ordered shipment anyway. Pilots died when engines failed in flight. Curtiss Wright produced defective aircraft components and falsified inspection reports. Government contracts required specific standards. The company ignored the standards and forged the paperwork. Planes crashed. Investigations traced the failures to manufacturing defects. The committee found ammunition shipped overseas without proper testing. Soldiers in combat faced enemies while their own weapons malfunctioned. Cartridges failed to fire. Shells failed to detonate. The manufacturers had collected payment for defective products. Steel companies submitted inflated invoices. Government inspectors approved them without verification. The companies used inferior materials and charged premium prices. Ships went to sea with substandard plate. Some of those ships never returned. Truman's methods were straightforward. He subpoenaed records. He demanded testimony under oath. He followed the money from Treasury to corporate bank accounts. When executives claimed ignorance, he confronted them with their own memoranda. The committee worked because Truman understood publicity. He held public hearings. He gave newspaper interviews. He made the findings impossible to ignore or suppress. Media coverage protected investigators from political retaliation. Corporate executives despised the senator from Missouri. They called him a publicity seeker. They called him dangerous. They lobbied to end the investigation. The investigation continued. Time magazine put Truman on its cover in March 1943. The caption called him the billion-dollar watchdog. The exposure made him a national figure. Franklin Roosevelt noticed. The president selected Truman as his running mate in 1944. When Roosevelt died in April 1945, the senator who had documented war profiteering became commander-in-chief of the largest military in world history. You would expect the new president to dismantle the machinery he had spent 4 years exposing. The expectation proved wrong. Truman authorized the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He sent American forces to Korea without a declaration of war. He signed the National Security Act of 1947. These institutions would shape American policy for the next 80 years. They created permanent bureaucracies with permanent budgets and permanent interests in expansion. The temporary wartime spending Truman had investigated became permanent peacetime spending. Truman later expressed concerns about what he had created. In a newspaper op-ed published in December 1963, the former president worried the CIA had become something beyond what he intended. The agency was gathering intelligence as he designed, but it was also running covert operations he never authorized. By 1963, the machinery operated beyond any single person's control. The man who documented the racket had given it permanent institutional form. The Truman Committee files remain in the National Archives. The testimony remains readable. The fraud patterns documented in 1943 appear again in 2023. 80 years separate the Truman investigation from the Pentagon's current audit failures. The structural problems persist. January 17, 1961. Television cameras pointed at the President of the United States. Dwight David Eisenhower sat behind his desk in the Oval Office. He was 3 days from leaving the presidency. He had one final message for the American people. No president in American history understood military power better than Eisenhower. He had commanded Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. He had coordinated the armies of multiple nations against Nazi Germany. He had witnessed what industrial warfare required, and he had spent 8 years watching the machinery grow from the inside. The speech took months to prepare. Eisenhower's personal papers at the Presidential Library in Abilene, Kansas, show multiple drafts. Each revision sharpened the warning. The president knew he was delivering the most important words of his final months in office. "We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions," Eisenhower told the nation. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations. The numbers were accurate. Total defense spending in 1960 exceeded total corporate profits in America. The military had become the single largest sector of the American economy. Then came the phrase, "no one would forget." In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Eisenhower chose each word deliberately. The original draft used a longer phrase. His speechwriters had written military-industrial congressional complex. Political advisors convinced the president to remove the reference to Congress. The truncated version still named the essential elements. The warning continued. The president spoke of public policy becoming the captive of a scientific technological elite. He described federal contracts becoming a substitute for intellectual curiosity at universities. He foresaw government money corrupting the institutions receiving it. The five-star general understood the dynamics from personal observation. He had watched defense contractors lobby his administration for 8 years. He had seen Pentagon officials approve contracts worth millions. He had watched those same officials retire and take positions with the companies they had funded. The structural incentives were clear. Eisenhower's private correspondence reveals deeper concerns. Letters to friends and associates show the president questioning whether American democracy would survive permanent military mobilization. He worried the economic interests supporting aggressive foreign policy would overwhelm interests supporting restraint. The farewell address aired on national television. Newspapers covered it the following morning. Editorial pages discussed the warning for several days. Then John F. Kennedy took office. The country moved on. The warning failed for structural reasons no speech could overcome. Defense spending touched every state. Military bases employed millions of American workers. Contractors funded congressional campaigns in both parties. The machinery had become self-perpetuating. Eisenhower himself had contributed to this machinery. His administration approved the programs creating it. His CIA overthrew governments in Iran and Guatemala. His defense budgets funded the missile gap rhetoric Kennedy would exploit in the 1960 campaign. This gave the warning credibility. The speaker was not an outside critic. The speaker was the man who built the system he now criticized. He knew it would grow beyond control because he had watched it grow beyond his own control. Kennedy increased military spending. Johnson increased it further. The Vietnam War consumed American resources for a decade. The contractors Eisenhower mentioned grew larger. The machinery expanded. The Eisenhower Presidential Library maintains the original speech drafts. Scholars have studied every revision. The earlier versions show an even more alarmed president struggling to find words Americans would accept. The final speech represented the most Eisenhower believed he could say without triggering institutional backlash. He was right to worry. The institutions he warned about outlasted him. They outlasted every subsequent president. They continue operating in 2024 at scales Eisenhower never imagined possible. The Government Accountability Office exists to audit federal spending. The agency has published over 4,000 reports on defense spending since the 1970s. Each report documents specific failures. The failures demonstrate the same structural problems Truman identified in 1941 and Eisenhower warned about in 1961. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter provides the clearest example. The program began in 2001 with an estimated cost of $233 billion for 2,966 aircraft. The military planned to replace aging fighters with a single advanced platform. The concept made sense. The execution became the most expensive weapons program in human history. By 2024, lifetime cost estimates reached $1.7 trillion. The program had exceeded original estimates by over $1.4 trillion. A trillion is a difficult number to comprehend. Written out, it contains 12 zeros. The F-35 cost overruns exceed the annual GDP of most nations. GAO reports document what went wrong. The engine experienced persistent problems requiring multiple redesigns. Software failures delayed deployment by years. The helmet display system, essential for pilot situational awareness, required complete rebuilding. Each problem generated additional contracts. Each contract generated additional profits for Lockheed Martin. The production structure was deliberate. Lockheed Martin, the prime contractor, spread manufacturing across 45 states and Puerto Rico. A factory in Texas builds one component. A facility in Arizona builds another. California produces a third. The geographic distribution ensures congressional support. When budget negotiations begin, senators from 45 states defend the F-35 program. Cutting the program means cutting jobs in their states. Cutting jobs means losing votes. The contractor designed the project to be politically untouchable. This represents the structural leverage Eisenhower identified 63 years ago. The machinery protects itself through the democratic process. Representatives defending their constituents defend the contractors employing their constituents. The system operates through democracy, not around it. The revolving door between Pentagon and defense industry spins continuously. The Government Accountability Project analyzed employment records in 2023. The study tracked 3-star and 4-star generals after retirement. 90% took positions with defense contractors or defense consulting firms within 2 years. These generals made procurement decisions while in uniform. They approved contracts worth billions of dollars. They shaped requirements, documents, determining which companies would compete. Then they collected paychecks from the companies they had funded. Federal law requires a cooling-off period before such employment. The restriction covers certain direct lobbying activities. Contractors adapted. They hire former generals as consultants. They pay them to advise on strategy. When the waiting period ends, the generals become lobbyists. The adaptation demonstrates how the machinery evolves to survive reform attempts. Congress passes restrictions. The industry finds workarounds. The restrictions become meaningless. The money keeps flowing. Securities and Exchange Commission filings reveal the business model in financial terms. Lockheed Martin submits annual reports as a publicly traded company. The 2023 filing shows revenue exceeding $67 billion. Over 70% of this revenue comes from the United States government. The company does not survive without government military spending. The entire business model depends on continued appropriations. Every dollar reduction in the defense budget threatens Lockheed Martin's bottom line. The company has enormous incentive to ensure defense spending continues growing. This incentive drives lobbying efforts. Defense contractors spent $117 million on lobbying in 2023, according to Open Secrets data. The industry employed 728 registered lobbyists. Many previously worked in Congress or the Pentagon. They know the budget process. They know the committee members. They know which arguments work. Campaign contributions follow the money trail. Defense contractor political action committees donated $27 million to congressional candidates in the 2022 election cycle. The donations went to both parties. Republicans received significant funding. Democrats received significant funding. Members sitting on armed services committees and appropriations subcommittees received the most. The contributions create relationships. When defense budget votes occur, the members who receive donations vote to approve. The pattern holds across decades and across party lines. The Pentagon failed its 6th consecutive annual audit in November 2023. Auditors reported they were unable to account for $3.8 trillion in assets. The Department of Defense is unable to tell Congress where the money went. It is unable to verify its own inventory of weapons, vehicles, and equipment. This failure would destroy any private corporation. Shareholders would revolt. Executives would face termination. Criminal investigations would begin. The company would collapse. The Pentagon faces no such consequences. Congress continues approving larger budgets. The president signs the appropriations. The auditors file their reports. The cycle repeats. The accountability failures Truman documented in the 1940s persist 80 years later. The warnings Eisenhower issued remain unheeded. The machinery continues absorbing resources. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022. Within weeks, the United States began transferring weapons at rates not seen since World War II. By early 2024, authorized assistance exceeded $75 billion. The defense industry responded as expected. Raytheon stock prices rose 15% in the months following invasion. Lockheed Martin rose 25%. General Dynamics gained 18%. Northrop Grumman climbed 22%. The market understood what the war meant for these companies. Conflict means contracts. Weapons sent to Ukraine must be replaced. Replacement orders go to defense contractors. Shareholders benefit. Congressional debates focused on which weapon systems to provide. Javelin anti-tank missiles manufactured by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. HIMARS rocket systems built by Lockheed Martin. Stinger anti-aircraft missiles from Raytheon. Abrams tanks from General Dynamics. Each authorization represented revenue for contractors with facilities in congressional districts. The same structural incentives applied. Members voting for Ukraine assistance were voting for jobs in their states. They were voting for campaign contributions in the next cycle. The fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act appropriated $886 billion. This represents the largest defense budget in American history. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support during a period of extreme partisan gridlock. Republicans and Democrats disagree on immigration policy. They disagree on healthcare funding. They disagree on tax rates. They disagree on abortion. They disagree on climate policy. They agree on defense spending. The agreement is structural, not ideological. Defense spending benefits constituencies in every state. Defense contractors employ voters across the political spectrum. Defense lobbyists fund campaigns for both parties. The bipartisan consensus reflects bipartisan incentives. Consider what $886 billion means for individual Americans. The United States population approaches 340 million people. Dividing the defense budget by population yields approximately $2,600 per person annually. A family of 4 pays over $2,400 each year for military spending through federal taxes. You pay this regardless of your views on military policy. You pay it whether you support current wars or oppose them. The payment extracts automatically from your income before you receive your paycheck. Where does your money go? To the contractors documented throughout this video. To the factories spread across 45 states. To the former generals collecting consulting fees. To the lobbyists maintaining access to congressional offices. To the shareholders whose portfolios include defense stocks. The money does not primarily support soldiers in uniform. Base pay for enlisted personnel remains modest. Veterans struggle to access health care through an overwhelmed system. Military housing conditions draw regular congressional investigations. Families of deployed service members qualify for food assistance programs. The machinery serves contractors. The troops serve as justification for the machinery. The gap between stated purpose and actual spending reveals institutional priorities. The business model requires credible threats. Peace threatens profits. A world without enemies would devastate defense contractor revenue. Companies dependent on government military spending need reasons for continued spending. This does not mean corporations manufacture wars from nothing. It means they benefit from wars and have no incentive to end them. They have no incentive to pursue diplomatic solutions, reducing military budgets. They have no incentive to build weapons, so effective conflicts end permanently. The Korean Peninsula provides an example. The Korean War ended with an armistice in 1953. No peace treaty was ever signed. American troops have remained stationed in South Korea for over 70 years. The military presence requires equipment. Equipment requires contracts. Contracts require appropriations. The Middle East provides another. American military involvement in the region spans 4 decades. Afghanistan provides the clearest case study. American forces occupied the country for 20 years, following the September 2001 attacks. Cost estimates exceed $2.3 trillion. The spending funded military operations, contractor support, and attempted reconstruction. 2 decades of spending produced no lasting strategic result. The government America built collapsed immediately when support ended. The contractors collected their payments regardless of outcomes. The Commission on Wartime. Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan documented this reality in its 2011 final report. The bipartisan commission found between $31 billion and $60 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. Kellogg Brown and Root billed for services never provided. Blackwater security incidents triggered no financial penalties despite substantial costs. Oversight mechanisms designed to prevent fraud proved inadequate. The money disappeared into a system designed to absorb it. The commission filed its report. Congress held hearings. The media covered findings for a news cycle. Then the country moved forward. The contractors continued winning new contracts. The structural problems persisted. You might ask why reforms consistently fail. The answer lies in the incentive structure Butler, Truman, and Eisenhower all described. Reformers face opposition from every beneficiary of the current system. Defense contractors oppose any change threatening profit margins. Pentagon bureaucrats oppose any change threatening budgets and headcount. Members of Congress oppose any change threatening jobs in their districts and campaign contributions from defense PACs. The coalition defending existing arrangements outweighs any reform coalition. Change would require simultaneous pressure from multiple directions. Voters would need to prioritize military spending reduction even when local jobs depend on military contracts. Legislators would need to refuse campaign contributions from defense interests. Presidents would need to reduce their own budget authority and geopolitical flexibility. Each actor would need to sacrifice personal interest for systemic reform. History suggests this will not happen. Butler exposed the system. The system continued. Truman investigated the fraud. The fraud continued. Eisenhower issued his warning. The warning went unheeded. 80 years of documented evidence has produced no structural change. The $14 trillion figure in this video's title represents cumulative defense spending since September 2001. 23 years of war on terror produced $14 trillion in military expenditure. The contractors named throughout this video received substantial portions of this total. Their shareholders profited. Their executives collected bonuses. Their lobbyists maintained the flow. You funded every dollar through federal taxes. You will fund the next trillion, and the trillion after. The system does not require your approval. It requires only your payment. It requires only your participation in an economy structured around military spending. It requires only your silence when budgets pass and audits fail. Smedley Butler died, believing exposure would produce change. He was wrong. Dwight Eisenhower retired, hoping his warning would restrain future leaders. It did not. Harry Truman documented fraud, expecting accountability to follow. Accountability never came. The military-industrial complex is not a conspiracy. Conspiracies require secrecy. This system operates in plain sight. Budget documents are public. Lobbying disclosures are searchable. SEC filings are mandatory. Audit failures make headlines. The evidence sits in government databases waiting for anyone to examine it. The system persists because it benefits too many powerful actors. It employs too many workers in too many congressional districts. It funds too many campaigns for too many legislators. It fills too many retirement portfolios for too many voters. The machinery has become structural. It perpetuates itself through the democratic process. It adapts to reform attempts. It survives, changes in administration and shifts in party control. You now understand how the machinery works. You have followed the money from World War I through Ukraine. The pattern is clear. The evidence answers this question conclusively. The question is what Americans will do with this knowledge. Butler, Truman, and Eisenhower all asked the same question. They never received a satisfactory answer. Welcome to Noob Historian. It was published, archived, and ignored. The documents exist. The money trail is traceable. Now you understand why.